This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Allied Solutions. With over 40 years of experience, our friends at Allied Solutions are focused on helping more than 4,000 clients grow their bottom line, protect their business and members, and evolve to stay ahead of the competition. Welcome to episode 132 of the show. I am Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm excited you're here today. This show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. Today, I get to have a conversation with Mark Robnett. Mark is the president and CEO of Justice Federal Credit Union. So let's jump right in. Mark, my friend, welcome to the show.
Oh, Randall, thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for a couple months now. We had the pleasure of meeting. We were introduced by a mutual friend of ours, and you happen to be on his board, Chuck Fagan over at PSCU. And I will tell you, I was excited just to kind of ask you this question. One of the things that before Chuck even introduced me to you that he was talking about was the fact that you kind of came up in the tech background side of things, which a lot of the times is unusual for a CEO. But in this world we live in, there's that kind of saying that every company is a tech company today. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, your story? Where did the career start, and how did it lead you to credit unions and where you are today?
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting. I do get this question quite a bit. So, normally I'd say I started my career working for Fiserv, right? It was my first job out of college, specifically the Galaxy division. But the reality is it began years before. When I was in college, I began working for Standard Federal Bank in their summer intern program. And as all college kids, I was looking for something that would get me out of the sun and not flipping burgers.
Right.
So I did that. So I had that job, right? I did it for 3 summers, with no anticipation of where that was going to head. Just a nice, comfortable job in an office. But when I graduated, Fiserv reached out to me because I had financial services background, experience in college, and I was graduating with this information systems degree. Now, I had no idea what a credit union data processor was, but,
right.
I was eager to work in technology, and, Fiserv looking for, information systems people, and again, experience in banking, it seemed to fit, and I got hired before I even graduated. So it was great. So I did that for a couple of years working for Fiserv in Michigan. Then I left Fiserv and moved to San Diego, much in the way that LeBron left and took his talents to South Beach, right?
I took my talents elsewhere, right? Yeah.
I took my talents to San Diego and began working for Scimitar. And I spent 7 years there. And it was a great experience. I met some great people. I learned a lot about technology and the industry from a bit of a different perspective because I had a few different hats over there. I worked in implementations, and then I worked in installations, which is more the technical aspect of it. And got a chance to work on some R&D things. So it really was educational for me, and I loved it. And there's some great people there. So from there, I went to go work for a client, my very first credit union. And it felt like it was the next logical step in my progression, but it was a much bigger job than I thought. Coming from the vendor side, you think you have everything buttoned up and you know everything. That could have been further from the truth. And so I worked for that first client for about 4 years. And man, when I tell you I learned a lot. But then, I moved on from there and took a step outside the industry and went to go work for Willis Towers Watson, which was an insurance broker, big one out of Nashville. And I did that for about a year and a half before I got the job at Justice working. I came in as vice president of IT.
Yeah.
So that was very, very much a next step thing. And oddly enough, that was always my goal, right, to be the vice president of IT. And, when I set out on this journey, with Fiserv, I actually visited a credit union as part of my orientation. And when I met the IT guy, I was like, wow, I want this guy's job. Right.
That's the one.
It looked cool. Yeah. It was like, hey, he had all these things reporting to him. It just made a lot of sense. And I thought that's where I wanted to be. So when I arrived at Justice, I kind of arrived. Right.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot here. I've been here for 9 years. But, how this all connects to being the CEO today is technology people have exposure to every aspect of the business because we support it. And so when you step back and think about it, who knows more about the business than the IT people?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to me. And when I was doing a little bit of homework for this show, I'm going to get into this a little bit more later, but I know you're also recently got on the board of CUES as well. And in doing some homework, I saw you went through like CEO Institute and things like that. So was there a switch or was that just a continued learning thing for you where you're like, you got the job you set out to get, the VP of IT, but then you were like, was there a point that you were like, you know what, I could probably run this whole boat show?
Well, it's interesting. So this is where having great people in your corner is really important. I had people urging me to step into that realm, right? And that I should go to the CEO Institute. And first I was like, well, why would I want to do that? Right? I got the job that I always set out to do. But because I believe in continuous learning and I think we should always push ourselves, I was like, well, hey, let me go ahead and see if this is for me. So I really looked at it as kind of a testing ground to see if this is something I would be interested in. And the CEO Institute was awesome. It was amazing. I met some great people, learned a lot there. And I have a saying with my team that the universe provides. And lo and behold, I find myself in a situation to compete for the CEO role here at Justice. And I ended up getting that position.
That's awesome. So I have to ask you this. I know we're both originally from Michigan, if I remember correctly. You mentioned moving from San Diego. So do you remember the first time you even heard of a credit union? I always kind of joke around that in Michigan, I always assumed that credit unions, you had to be in like the UAW to belong. And it depends on where I think you live, on what your perception is sometimes of them.
Well, that's interesting, right? And in Michigan, as you know, coming from Michigan, most of the people live in the southeast corridor, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
But there are so many credit unions there. You could throw a stone and probably hit 5, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
They tend to not be large. But so I was indoctrinated in the credit unions at age 15. My mom took me to join Telecom Credit Union, where I opened my first account.
Wait. So now, was that something? Did she work for the phone company at some point or something?
She did.
Oh, okay.
She worked for Michigan Bell, and that was their credit union.
So my mother, same deal. Like I even got my first like $2,000 car loan from at the time it was Consumers Credit Union, but she worked for Consumers Power, like out of high school, right? So
okay.
DTE Energy now. So it was Consumers Credit Union that's now become, merged into another. But that's so funny. So both of our moms got us our first accounts there from their jobs.
Absolutely. So quick question. So are you still a member of that credit union today?
I am. Yep. I still do have an account there. And then I have another one down in South Carolina as well. So that's when I moved down there. So
do I. Yep. I'm still a member, although they've changed their name. I think it's Vibe today, but I'm still a member there today.
I love it. That's fantastic. So let's talk credit unions here. Again, another place that I was really excited to ask you, just because of your background and what you're doing at Justice. But what has you most excited, like blimp level, right, for our movement as a whole when you look forward? And, I'd love to hear what you're working on that I guess you're most excited about right now.
Honestly, what I'm really excited about right now is the credit union industry's strategic move to embrace fintech. Technology is very powerful. Very powerful. And it can be an accelerator when harnessed correctly. So as a business, what we're working on is business intelligence and data analytics initiatives right now. Our push is to try to understand our members better. By understanding their behaviors, we can truly help them reach their financial goals. That's our thinking. And I think what most credit unions probably should be focused on at this point, in addition to business intelligence and data analytics, is digital transformation, right? And so this is something I took very seriously when I took over the credit union. Obviously, there's projects written in there and there's processes that one looks at. But I do think that a lot of credit unions view digital transformation as just that, right? A project to digitize processes or onboard new systems. But I see it more fundamentally as a strategic posture. Right? Digital transformation is so much more than just adopting the latest technology. It's about constantly reimagining how we can serve our members better. And that's continuous improvement in the truest sense, in my mind.
So let me ask you this. In the first season of the show, I asked this question quite a bit, but sometimes I'd get pushback on it. And I think maybe one of the reasons I took it out of the show was because I'm not sure why I took it out, actually. But like I've always viewed technology for credit unions as kind of the great equalizer. In years past, what Bank of America or Chase could do, we don't have to build everything internally ourselves, right? Like there's just so many, you mentioned fintech, right? There's so many people to partner with. So do you view technology for let's say the smaller credit union as an equalizer, or do you see it as, and this is where I used to get pushback a little bit, some people viewed it as a hindrance to maybe that small to mid-sized credit union? I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Oh, absolutely. No, I definitely believe it's the former. It's the great equalizer. You can appear larger than you truly are with the right technology. I guess if they see it as a hindrance, maybe it's because of the cost or the burden kind of thing. But, I think that's where one has to look at yourself objectively and come to the realization, I think, as most companies have, that you're a data company for all practical purposes, right? And a member can get an account or something anywhere. Why would they choose to do business with you? What's your differentiator going to be? So for us, it's law enforcement, right? And so we try to appeal to those guys by creating products and services that appeal to them. And that's going to help them reach their goals. And so technology has a way of equalizing the playing field when you start talking about the bigger players, Bank of America, Capital One, and whatnot. So to your earlier point about not having to build everything, I don't think most credit unions want to go down that avenue. Right. I'm fairly certain Navy, the biggest credit union there isn't trying to build everything. I mean, it could be a huge burden to go down that avenue because then you have all of the maintenance associated with building something in-house. But the reality is that technology will continue to disrupt our industry, right? So we must approach the future with some optimism and find our place in a new order because technology and fintechs will continue to disrupt. And I think you have a lot of credit unions who view fintech as the enemy. I'm not on that bandwagon at all.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think back to even when we were starting CUInsight, I remember one of the first times we were doing a rebuild of the site, I had this whole wish list and the developer was like, well, sure, if you had $1 million, but because you had to really almost build everything,
right.
From scratch. And you take that back to a few years ago, and even as we look at things now, it's accessible. It's out there. If there's something I want done, we can probably find it already, right? And it can plug right in. So to me, I look at that from a CUInsight small business standpoint, but also, when you think about the credit unions, it's out there if you find it, right?
Absolutely. And it's in the cloud, Randall, right?
Right.
So you get the redundancy and the flexibility that brings.
Absolutely. So I kind of mentioned it already. You're on the PSCU board. You're on the CUIs board. Why is it important to you to contribute to credit unions above and beyond, the four walls of justice?
Well, I think it's important to be a lifelong learner, right? And to share the knowledge you acquire with others. So I see the work that I do with PSCU and CUIs as helpful to Justice FCU and the industry at large because I can bring a voice to that boardroom for credit unions like Justice, whether it's size or in focus. So, the beauty of the credit industry is in our ability and our desire to share with each other. We are, in fact, people helping people, right? That's our tagline. So lastly, I believe, we all have people, helping us along the way in our individual journeys, right? And I think we have a responsibility to pay that support forward. And so this is a way I can do that.
I love it. So one of the things that I love about this podcast is often it's just these scratch my own itch questions. I get to pick smart people's brains. So and what you've picked up along the way, you've mentioned kind of that being a lifelong learner. Was there an investment that you made in your career that you kind of look back on and go, wow, that changed things? And I use the example, Warren Buffett says it was Dale Carnegie course. Was there something that you can kind of pinpoint or think back on that was that was a good investment in myself?
I've had someone ask me something like that before, but I'd have to say it's something really fundamental, right? And something basic that I think we have a tendency to overlook. And I have to say it's seeking out and collecting great mentors. It's unbelievably important to have people in your corner as a sounding board or to help give you advice as you reach for your ultimate goals, right? Some like to believe that they arrive at their successes, all on their own. But the reality is we all have people helping us, pushing us and motivating us along the way. And a lot of my mentors go beyond the credit union industry, and that's by design, and I truly do credit these people, with helping mold me into the person I am today. And as I say that, two people come to mind strongly. And as I have two of my favorite mentors, one was a guy named Tom Williams, who I met during my time at Scimitar. He works for the Jack Henry Centurion Division, and he's my sage. He always has sage advice, and many people in the industry know him. And if you know Tom, you love him. He's just an awesome guy. And the other guy, right, and then that's, further into my career, was a guy I met in college. His name's John Smith. I'm going to go ahead and give him a shout out there.
A shout out to John, yeah.
I was a freshman, and I think he was probably a senior at this time. But he was just a great big brother and role model, right? And we're very close to this day. And so, being humble enough, right, to be open to some feedback and being able to share, what your thoughts and hopes and dreams, aspirations are, it's a good thing. I do hate that. I feel like we're in this place in the world where people can't be open to that and have mentors help. But we do need these folks.
So let me ask you this. When you think back over, these mentors that you've had in your life, were they people that you sought out, or did the universe kind of bring them to you? Like if somebody was listening today who's like, I really probably could use more mentorship because I'd like to be the CEO someday. What would your advice be to them?
It's actually both. It's actually both, right? Some I've sought out specifically because I was like, wow, I need someone who knows this. So, for example, when I worked for Scimitar, there was a guy named Will DeMyers. I'm going to go and give him a shout out. Just super learned guy, knew all about networking. And I always say I went to the Will DeMyers School of Networking, right? Because he just taught me so much. But I sought him out and created this mentorship between the two of us. But then there's situations where the universe provides people. And I think it's up to you to cultivate that relationship. If people cross your path and they share information with you, don't leave it on that other person to continue that connection. I think it's up to you to say, hey, you know what? I appreciated that feedback. Let me try to get more here from that person.
I couldn't agree more. That's for sure. I always feel like, and I don't know where you probably think similar on this one as well, but like to have those people that not only like that you can bounce things off of, but that like so often I've found that like, if I throw an idea out there, people are like, that's great. That's amazing. But to have the person who actually like comes back and goes, why would you do that? Or what am I missing? That type of a thing where it's like,
Exactly.
It makes you go dicker. Like you need that honest, feedback. And sometimes you don't get that directly around you. So it's great to have other places, I've found at least. A question on building a leadership team. You've been at Justice now for a little while. We talk about culture a lot, but I'd almost like to take that a step back. When you're building your team, that kind of, your senior leadership team, what are you trying to find? What are those characteristics that you're looking for when you're making a decision? And I'll kind of throw an add-on to you here as well. Is there something with that when you're talking to somebody, it just like turns you off and you're like, no, you're not a fit here?
Okay, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd have to say a good leadership team, it's like a good stew, right? Too much of one ingredient can ruin it. So when I'm looking for teammates, I look for people who will complement me, right? And also people who possess skills or attributes that, maybe I don't have or minimally I don't think I'm good at. So when I try to assess them as a leader, I want to look at how they problem solve. Are they collaborative? Do they believe in the strength of a team? And then I try to get examples of them living out their beliefs. If you believe these things, and you should have some examples to share with me. One of the other things that's really important, I think, every credit union will agree. One of the major items is always fit when it comes into my decision making, because every credit union has their own unique culture, and the worst thing you could do is try to put a Lamborghini engine into a Topaz, right? That's just not going to work. So, fit is ultimately really, really important. So then I'm trying to assess whether or not we can all play our positions, but then do it with a level of synergy, right? Where, we're not stepping on each other and everyone knows their role. If you look at sports as a great example of this, Michael Jordan, arguably one of the greatest basketball players to ever play, couldn't win a championship until he had the right teammates. You need a Scottie Pippen, you needed all the other guys who helped support him on that journey to win those championships. He couldn't do it alone,
Couldn't get through Detroit for a few years.
And we take a lot of pride in that, right? As Michiganders, right?
That we do. So a question for you on that. While you were talking, I started to think about, coming up again, not to circle back too much on this, but in the IT side, did you always feel like you were a natural leader, or is that something that you had to learn over time as well?
That's interesting, Randall. I'm going to tell you a quick story that one of my fraternity brothers shared with me. So am in a fraternity, and I, was president of said fraternity. And so my fraternity brother told me that, hey, he had all these examples of where I was being the CEO even back then.
Okay.
By nature of the way that I do things, I kind of had to take charge of a lot of situations and cast a vision and say, hey, we're heading over here. This is what we're doing. So from the technology space, I would say so, because when it comes to implementations and installations, you kind of dropped into a situation and you have to figure out the way forward, right? The plan for implementing the new system or the installation plan with the hardware. You kind of got to take charge of that.
You had the leadership chops back in college already. Awesome. So now that you have a team, right? Like, how do you give feedback? And could you give an example? And you obviously don't want to call anybody out. We love to call out the shout outs. You don't have to call anybody out here, but maybe somebody you think about where you were disappointed, say the performance or results, and you had to give feedback. How do you go about doing that?
Well, okay. So I have a saying with my team. I have a lot of sayings, by the way, if you haven't figured that out.
Which makes it great for us because it makes it easy to pick the title of the show. We would just probably pick one of those out. So I
tell them, bad news does not age well. Okay. So I like to know what's happening sooner in the process rather than later. And it's funny, I think I communicate often and with tact. However, I do find that my perception of sufficient feedback and what some other people perceive as frequent and sufficient feedback sometimes can vary, right?
Right.
But as I've gotten to know each team member, I've kind of figured out, who needs more direct guidance and more detail, and those who just need some direction, a direction, and they just kind of take it from there. But to this point, I did have an issue once where a direct report made a monetary mistake, twice even, right? And it was a pretty high dollar amount kind of mistake, which was worsened by the fact that they didn't let me know early, right? And so there wasn't much communication. Now, I have a good tolerance for mistakes because, we're all human. And I believe if you aren't trying very hard, then you don't get the benefit of making mistakes. And there are always learning opportunities there. But what I had to do was detail the true depths of my disappointment with this person. And obviously, there was going to be some ramifications, some discipline that was very direct because, again, it was the second time we made this mistake. And it was difficult for the employee because I don't think they had seen me in that light before. But ultimately, it was a learning opportunity. And I try to turn these difficult moments into teachable moments that we can all grow from. So ultimately, I think the takeaway for that person was they learned more about me. They also learn when to alert me to problems so that they don't turn into bigger problems.
Going forward, yeah. Awesome. Good stuff. What do you think makes a good CEO or a leader in general? Any traits you look for?
I think optimism and trust, right? I think a good leader has to be optimistic about the future and what lies ahead.
Tell me more about trust.
Trust?
Yeah.
Well, trust is a funny thing, right? It takes, sometimes years to create and moments to lose. You know what I mean?
To lose, yeah.
And it's a very finicky thing, but if your people don't trust you, they can't possibly believe in you.
Yeah.
Right? So, one of my mentors used to say this because everything was a crisis, when it comes to technology. Oh, something's down. It's a crisis.
Yep.
He would say in times of crisis, character is revealed.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And so what he meant by that, my takeaway at least, was that, you get the people who panic, they run around in circles like a chicken. Oh my God, this guy is falling. And you got other people who just get dialed in and get focused. Those are your leaders, right? They see the crisis and they're immediately mapping out a way forward.
Absolutely.
Another example of that, I think, is the pandemic.
Yep.
I do think, because of that crisis, many leaders were unearthed because they had to take charge during a very chaotic time. And they've stepped up. And I myself am very proud of the leaders that we have that have stepped up during that period.
I will say that it was amazing to watch. I think in the beginning of the pandemic, that idea that credit unions can't move fast, I think we threw that out the window. And I hope people continue to do that because, boy, like you said, it was from somebody who watches the industry from that blimp level, it was fun to watch how fast people were moving and doing some pretty amazing stuff, right? So
absolutely.
Let me ask you this, and it goes down that line. As a leader, how do you keep moving fast, and how do you make those pivots? As we were talking earlier, talking about technology, it doesn't slow down. And I'd like to kind of take this even a step further. But one of the things that it took me a while to learn was that idea of moving past a project. Maybe if it might have seemed like a great idea, but if it's not working, you only have so much resources, energy, all of that type of stuff. So that idea of when do you put something to bed and not be married to it, right? So how do you keep agile at the credit union and make sure that you're continuing to move forward even as things change?
So I have another saying here, and it's don't be afraid to change the change. Right. So as the organization continues to evolve, we find things that, if we find things that aren't working the way we thought or hoped, my thing is we always have to have enough courage to make another change. It ultimately serves no one if the project doesn't make us better as an organization. And so I find that that's where, people having, trust and faith in the institution and its leaders becomes, really important because most folks don't want to stop a project because we've committed. What are people going to think about me? But, they have to be made safe to be able to make that call. So in our organization, killing a project usually happens when the sponsor has enough information to abort.
Okay. Yep. Oh, that was a tough one for, I think, me to learn, quite honestly. So I admit my shortcomings on that. It was I can make this work somehow. So I wanted to ask a question about the board relationship, team member relationship, where, you have Oftentimes when talking to CEOs on this show with volunteer boards, you have many different personalities on there, but dealing with that person who thinks their way is the right way all the time, they may have great intention. Like, I'm not trying to knock those folks, but how do you navigate that relationship? And I'll tell you where this came from. Oftentimes you hear about, the CEO is an interesting position in the organization. You have your board kind of as your bosses, right? And then you have the rest of the organization that's your team as well. And sometimes people feel like they're on a little bit of an island. It sounds like you have amazing mentors that help you with that. But like, how do you navigate that relationship? Because I've found that people coming into the CEO role, that board relationship is actually the most interesting one for them, because it's maybe not something that they've had to deal with in the past if they were a senior level leader in a credit union.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been down this road many times. And so, but I think that the trick is to do your homework, right? And bring data to back up your position, to follow that up with examples of what that person's position means for the organization, and then contrast that with your own. In my experience, I find that people who truly dig into their own opinion don't usually have a lot of data to back up that position. It's just usually all emotional, right? This is, they think it's the right thing to do because they think it's the right thing to do. I try to appeal to people's sense of logic. And the board relationship is one way, right? One area where, you're going to find that level of conflict sometimes, but also even on the management team, just because I select them doesn't mean that there's groupthink going on, right? Everyone has their opinion and a way forward. And I try to resist this urge to kind of put your thumb on the scale and be like, well, I'm the CEO and we're going to do it this way. I really want the best ideas to win. So we do have some spirited debate.
Now I'm going down a rabbit hole. How do you create that safe kind of area to be able to have that spirited debate in let's say the boardroom or in the office?
I think that's where trust comes back, right? I mean, we're all focused on the same thing, which is, the prosperity of the credit union. We really want the credit union to be successful. And I'm not married to my idea being the one that has to win out. I want the best idea to win. And that's always a message I'm sending to my team. Hey, feel free to challenge me if you disagree, but you better have some data to back that up. Don't come in here with a half-baked idea kind of thing. And I think that's how the team encourages and pushes each other to be better.
One more kind of leadership question before we have a little bit of fun with the rapid fire questions, kind of get towards the end of this show. We've talked about it a lot over the last couple of years, so I really want to keep it more looking forward. But that idea of like work being a physical place, and I'm doing air quotes around work, many credit unions, a couple of years back were skeptical about the idea of remote workforce. What do you view, like if you look forward, what does a career in credit unions look like down the road?
Well, I think the career is going to be one that allows for flexibility. Most people who choose a credit union as a place to work is because they usually are attracted to the intangible stuff, not so much just purely the paycheck. If it's about the money, you can obviously find more of that someplace else. And we prioritize that we take care of our people, right? That's embedded in most credit unions' culture. So I think the working environment is going to be a hybrid model where people get work done when it makes sense for them. For example, we still have a lot of people outside the organization because it's been working for us and we want to continue on with what's working. But what we did determine is that, there is really no need for our processors to be inside the building. They actually work better outside. And it's probably because there's less distractions and it works for them, especially the ones with children. They get to be home to collect the kids from school. It kind of creates a balance, right, for them and for us. So, we desperately want to support those folks and then identify these roles where more hybrid or more telecommuting is advantageous to the credit union. So I do think that credit unions will come to the table here. I believe that many of them struggle with, how do I know that the work's getting done? Right.
That can go back to the trust thing as well.
Oh, right? Absolutely. Right. Well, but that's where and that's where I would say technology has a way of ensuring that, and just pure output, right? A lot of the roles, hey, well, if you put in a full 8 hours work, I should see this output. So I think there's some pretty simple ways to know that that's happening. But the more important component that I think credit unions are struggling with is the culture one.
That's the exact direction I was going to ask you about. I know we've been remote at CUInsight for about 6 years now, and that's still when we have new people come in, it is still like building that culture digitally. It's more difficult than when we were all sitting in the office together. So,
well, absolutely. Right. So, credit unions love their culture, right? Their unique culture. So the problem is, how do you extend that culture to the remote people? That's really what you just said, right? And make them feel like they really understand what the organization's all about. And I would say, hey, most people are probably still working on that. But a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves is the culture within the four walls or is it in the people?
Yeah, I
Right.
like that.
And how do you extend it? Okay. I don't have the answer. Like I say, we're
Right?
still
No,
working on it.
boy. I am a fan of questions that make us think, and that is a really good one. That's a good way to look at it, that's for sure. So to wrap this thing up, want to have a little fun with some rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So when was the last time, either personally or professionally, you were just like, I'm amazed. That's amazing.
I'm going to go personal on this one because this just happened. So I was amazed by my son's growth as a young man, right? He's 12 now. Okay. And
Okay.
quick short story. His sister, who's 8, competed in her first cheer competition recently, and her team came in 3rd or 4th. And he coached her through her disappointment using the same words that I've used with him when he didn't win a tournament or win a game. I had such pride listening to this play out. I can't
That's
even
awesome.
tell you. The fact that he paid it forward meant everything.
That is amazing. That's fantastic to be a fly on the wall and hear that one. Eh? So, one of the things that I think we've all found over careers is that sometimes leading an organization can consume us. Tough to turn off. And often that's at the detriment of some of our personal relationships. What have you lived and learned to create some of that balance with your family? You mentioned your son and your daughter. Any hacks that you can share with, I wouldn't say the young leaders coming up, but probably for all of us, right? So,
okay. So another area where I wish I had the answer because I don't, but I do agree, that the job can be all consuming. And I just say that, hey, I'm still learning to balance it, but it really is important to take time away from the organization, and I think that's why you collect and you put together a good team, right? So that you can share that burden. One thing I am committed to doing, and every day I get a little better at it. Hey, I work hard and then I commit to playing hard, right? When I do get time away.
So what's the play hard?
Oh, well, I like to travel with the family. Like I said, I'm very involved in my kids' activities. So I think my wife says I spoil these kids a bit, but, they're only young once. And again, the job can be all consuming. And so I'd want to spend my time with the people that matter most.
That's fantastic. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received and who gave it to you?
So I'm going to go professional here. That as an African American in leadership, I'm representing more than myself, and that I have a responsibility to open doors, not just for myself, but for others to follow. And that I should never forget that. And you know who told me that?
Who?
Colin Powell.
That's wow.
I got a chance to meet him, and I had a book, and he autographed it for me, and exchanged a couple of words, and that's always stuck with me.
I can imagine that it would. I wasn't expecting that. So that's fantastic. Now, again, I hope you don't mind me digging in here a little bit. How have you done that? You're a CEO now. My guess is, and I hope I'm not I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. My guess is when you're around a bunch of other CEOs, the room doesn't necessarily always look like you.
Absolutely not.
How about that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how are you opening those doors so that there's more diversity in the leadership of credit unions?
Well, that's interesting. So I'm very committed to reaching out and mentoring, right? So even if it's just in the moment, like, you mentioned those rooms, right? A lot of times they don't look like me. But, if you watch those rooms, you see people sometimes who are in the background. And it's because they don't feel connected to what's happening. And I like to seek those people out and talk with them and then try to engage them. Whether it's something I can connect them with someone in the room, I introduce them to other folks. I even do this with, newer CEOs that I've met. I think it's important for someone to help show the way forward or what's possible kind of thing. And I can do this because it's been done for me.
Yeah. I love it. That's good. That's good. Yeah, he was on the podcast before, but realized that you guys knew each other too at GAC when we saw each other. Ken Calhoun, he's become a friend over the last couple of years. So, and I know he had told me that you have been somebody you could bounce things off of over the years. So that's pretty cool. I dig the idea of having a mission, not necessarily that job. Do you have a personal mission statement, or what is it that drives you?
I would say to be an inspirational leader, offering hope, optimism, and support to everyone I meet.
That's good stuff. What's the greatest album of all time?
Oh, Thriller, easily.
God.
I'm a child of the 80s. It's the first album I could just play from beginning to end without having to skip anything.
My guess is we are probably around the same age. So it's, I remember listening all the way through that. That's for sure. So what are you currently reading? And is there a book that either you've gifted over the years or that you just think everybody should read?
Well, there are a few that I would think everybody should read. I just recommended a book to a friend. It's called The 48 Laws of Power. But I would say the book that I'm reading right now, I'm just getting into a couple of 2 or 3 chapters in. It's called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. And this is actually very interesting because
the poker player?
The poker player, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now she's a speaker and, she speaks on decision strategy. Now, this is interesting because I am not a gambler by any stretch of the imagination. I like to play it safe. I like keeping my own money. But, the premise of the book is that decisions are not like chess. They're like poker. In chess, it's all about strategy. In poker, you don't have all the facts. You don't know what the other person has. What you do have are probabilities and possibilities.
Yeah.
Right. So the book talks about, the need to stop judging decisions based on just the result, but the process we took to make that decision. Right. Because we won't always know all the information. We can't control what everyone else does. But what we can do, however, is to use a process and make good decisions based on the information we have.
Oh, I'm gonna have to get that book. You're adding to the reading list, so we will link to that in the show notes. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
Oh, it's my mom. Absolutely.
Well, gets a shout out.
And, it's because I feel like she did what she set out to do. When I was a kid, I looked in still had her yearbook. And, she wanted to be an operator. I couldn't believe it. Right. So she ended up working for Michigan Bell and she advanced, well beyond that in her career. But she accomplished what she set out to do. And so in my mind, the definition of a success is, the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Okay. She wanted a family. She had that. She had a career. She retired from that career. Now she's about to retire again. She's a dynamo. Right. and more importantly, just from a more human perspective, she managed through a lot of adversity as a single mom, but she never lost her optimism for life. So in my mind, she's the greatest success.
That is beautiful. Well, there you go, my friend. Thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show. I greatly appreciate you taking the time today. 2 last questions. Number 1, any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners or asks of them? And then what's the best way to get a hold of you if people have more questions of you? LinkedIn, email, what's your poison?
Final thought. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a quote junkie. I just love them. So I'm going to share my very favorite quote with you guys, and it's by none other than Colin Powell. Perpetual optimism, believing in yourself, believing in your purpose, believing you will prevail, and demonstrating passion and confidence is a force multiplier. If you believe and have prepared your followers, the followers will believe.
That is a good way to wrap it up. That's a great quote. And then, are you on LinkedIn? Is that the easiest way if people want to connect?
Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can reach me here at the credit union at robnetm@jfcu.org.
Awesome. Well, we will put that in the show notes as well. Thank you again for being here, my friend. Before we go, a few things on my end. Make sure to check out Allied Solutions in the show note. I'm grateful for their support of the podcast and allowing me to have this much fun doing what I do. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And while you're there, if you think we're so deserving, a 5-star review would be fantastic. It helps with the visibility of the show. If you don't think we're worth the 5 stars, just forget I asked. And if you're looking for a book, that maybe one that was mentioned on the show, I know Mark added to my reading list here, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience book list, and your next read can be on its way from Amazon. And certainly, last but not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate all the kind words that come in about the show. I hope everyone stays well, and I look forward to seeing everyone soon.